What's up, guys? Before we get started here, I just want to point everyone in the direction of the KRW Network. On that channel, we're going to be talking about literally anything, not just Saw content, American Horror Story, and everything else that I cover on this channel, but literally going through the gauntlet, doing lists, theories, speculations, pitches, and just everything else every Monday and Thursday, as well as other discussion videos and maybe more content as that channel grows. We're very excited for it, so I hope everybody will go and share their love and support. You can find the link in the description section below. Go subscribe and share that channel out because we're very excited for it. Anyway, with that being said, here's the video. Okay, so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is the fact that American Horror Story is shooting season 10 in October. Now, at the time of recording this, as I've said in some of my other videos, we're not really sure when we're going to be getting season 10. It could be as early as, pretty much March or April next year, or they might just push it off. They'll release it in the fall where they usually release American Horror Story, and then they're just going to push back season 11, 12, and 13 going forward. So it's kind of up in the air exactly how many seasons or how much content we're going to be getting in 2021. With that being said, though, we do know, and now we have recent confirmation that they're still working and heavily promoting the fact that American Horror Stories, the spinoff of the popular television show, is going to be coming to Hulu exclusively for people in the States. Now, before I get into that, because we're talking about American Horror Stories in this video, I know that there's some people internationally who watch my videos and they're curious as to where this show will end up because they don't have Hulu in their countries. It's possible that American Horror Stories will air pretty much wherever you watch American Horror Story. It's also possible that they'll go the CBS All Access route where the people in the States have to watch it on Hulu, but all the international markets have to watch it on some other streaming network that bought the exclusive rights. Look, I know that this is a pitch video and we're going to get to that, but the simple truth of the matter is one of the reasons they're doing this as a spin-off series and they're kind of extending the brand is a little bit cynical because obviously now that Fox is owned by Disney and all of this stuff is slowly moving over to Hulu, at least in the States. If you have Netflix, one of the things you might have realized recently is that Apocalypse was taken away. They're never going to put 1984 on Netflix. And now we don't really know exactly when the other 7 seasons are going to be taken off of Netflix altogether. So now doing stuff like this is not only going to allow them to have exclusive content on a very big streaming platform that's going to push and pull audiences towards that platform to buy it on a monthly basis, but it's also going to open up revenue sources into the international markets where bidding wars might happen and whoever decides to pay the most money is going to be able to stream it to all of their viewers. The economics of all this is just kind of something to behold, and honestly, I don't know everything and neither does anybody else who might tell you otherwise, so that's something to think about. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off a topic. The point of this video is to talk about American Horror Stories and kind of dive a little bit into what the series could really be about. As you might already know, American Horror Stories is going to be a little bit different from its main television show, and where as the American Horror Story main show is a whole season that is its own story, but loosely connected to everything else that's happening, American Horror Stories is going to be an anthology-based episodic show, where we're probably going to be following different people throughout every single episode. Now, there's no telling right now whether it's just going to be a new story every single episode, or if they're going to go the recently confirmed Walking Dead route, where they're going to be doing an anthology series that's both episodic but also multi-episode episodic adventures for certain characters. And I guess I kind of mean to say there is it might not be uncommon for American Horror Stories to have kind of a two-parter system where you start the episode and then you have to wait until the next week in order to see the conclusion to that specific story. And I guess that also makes me wonder whether it's possible that they're going to just be picking up with certain locations that we've seen in previous seasons of American Horror Story. Not that I would really want to be going back to Murder House or maybe Briarcliff or Camp Redwood or any other place that we've seen throughout the course of the first 9 or 10 seasons of the show. But because of the way this story is structured, you would kind of be hard-pressed not to find some story worth telling in any of those locations. A lot of them have been haunted or at least kind of surrounded by their certain case of horror or supernatural elements for decades, and maybe one of the things they can do with this show if they wanted to is just have an episode placed in the middle of a season or right before it in order to give a little bit more context to the viewer who goes back and rewatches some of the previous seasons. And you know what, as a fan of both American Horror Story and The Walking Dead, I have to say that seems like what AMC wants to do with their anthology series in The Walking Dead, and it's gotten me really excited. So if they decide and they figure out a way to do it with American Horror Story, I'm all for it. Of course, one of the things that a lot of people, as well as myself, thought when they first started talking about this show was it's going to be the American Horror Story version of The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, to name some of the more modern or even classic anthology episodic storytelling shows. With that being said, I feel like American Horror Story already has embedded into its very structure a very interesting take to create a spin-off show that's set around the entirety of America, and that is to make every single season just taking place over the course of one night, but spread out through all of America. That way you can have an episode in New York or Los Angeles and other places they've never gone in any type of American Horror Story show ever. They don't even have to go there. They can just say that they're in this state or this state and make it look as much like that state as possible, but then tell that specific story with these new characters in which all of it takes place in the broader narrative of AHS. One of the best things about this particular idea to me is that you're not tied to one specific location for your entire story. And if we're clear, that's probably the worst thing that American Horror Story has going for it ever since, let's say, season 5 with Hotel. And look, that's not me saying that the main series has lost a lot of its step in the intervening years between season 5 and season 9 or 10, but I think one of the things that myself and many of the other fans can agree on is that even though you have amazing actors just chewing up all the scenery and trying their best to portray not one character but maybe several over the course of one season, once we get a couple of episodes into each individual season, the theme or the location kind of loses its luster. Yes, I love Camp Redwood throughout most of 1984, but by the time we were at an end to it, even the show seemed to be making fun of its own tropes and how everyone was just stuck there, you couldn't get out. And we all remember how Apocalypse just decided that the bunker was way too boring to spend any more than 3 or 4 episodes, so after a couple of episodes, they just decided to do an entire flashback for the rest of the season. And for me, that was rather disappointing. There was a lot of good build up with that part of the season, and then they just kind of dropped the ball because obviously they had no idea how to progress it forward. But when you think of it in this scenario with this series, it makes a ton of sense. One of the things that we know about American Horror Story is just how much more can happen on a Halloween night. You can play around with ghosts, you can bring in warlocks and witches, maybe even bring in some werewolf stuff and murderers and everything else that you can play with that specific night, taking place over one night across the entire United States with absolutely no barriers as to where each individual story needs to play out. But even to kind of make it more interesting for the people who are really paying attention, you can have things playing out in the background that either reference a story that we saw previously in the season or maybe even hint at other stories to come, while giving everyone a sense that all of this is happening at the same time and all of this stuff happens every single year that we've been watching this entire series. The fact that we've been focusing on Briarcliff or the murder house or any other place that we've seen throughout is just because we're focused on that one area and not the entirety of the country. For me, I feel like this is a really interesting way to take this series, at least for the first season, in order to give everyone a sense of where we're going with the show in season 2 and onward. But if that's not something that's really doing it for you, you don't really understand or care for that pitch, then I have one more that I want people to think about and tell me in the comment section below which of these 3 is your favorite. One of the things that we know about the AHS brand over the last 10 years is how they've decided to kind of create a theme with each individual season, with something like 1984 being the slasher season of American Horror Story, while Cult was kind of more of a realistic cultural-based phenomenon in which people kind of get together in tribal mentalities. We had a fair bit of demon possession in Asylum, and then obviously Murder House was about ghost stories. So what if American Horror Stories did something like that, where each individual season has a specific theme, but every single episode draws on different elements of that theme throughout horror history? One of the best things about this entire series is how it plays off of tropes that we know and love as horror fans. And I think it would be really cool to see each individual story try to upend something of a specific trope or theme that we've seen in horror movies altogether. I mean, I guess the easiest way to explain this is kind of try to imagine if the first season of American Horror Stories was the slasher season that 1984 was. And that way you don't have to tell an entire 9-episode story dealing with this one camp and with various serial killers coming in and out and all the stuff with ghosts and everything you would have to do with that. You could do one that's kind of a deconstruction of Freddy Krueger, and then Jason Voorhees, maybe Michael Myers. You can combine those two, but because it's more of a horror icon trope thing, then you could do somewhat of a jigsaw thing. And every episode of this episodic anthology series could deal with another horror icon. Just because this is me, I would honestly really like to see something like my dark web idea that I pitched a couple years back for something like this, like American Horror Stories Dark Web. Just because I feel like there's so much you can mine from that specific theme that you don't have to tell a broad story with it. You could just do one episode at a time. But really, I'm not sure what they're going to do with this show right now. Nobody really knows. I'm just throwing this stuff out there because these are the 3 interesting ideas I can come up with in order to gain interest from longtime fans and even new ones. So let's do this, guys and girls. Let's go down to the comment section below and have this discussion. What things would you like to see from this spin-off series, and what are you hoping for? I hope everyone is having a fantastic day, staying safe and healthy. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. It's been real.